At first, nobody on those trains knew anything was wrong. It was just after 8 o'clock on the morning of March 20th, 1995, and Tokyo was doing what Tokyo always did. Trains were on time. Platforms were crowded. Office workers were packed shoulder to shoulder, heading into another Monday. Then little things started happening. Passengers noticed a strange smell. Eyes began to sting. People coughed, rubbed their faces, and tried to shake it off. For a few moments, it felt like one of those odd problems you expect to pass in a minute. It didn't pass. Within minutes, people were stumbling out of train cars and collapsing onto station platforms. Vision blurred, breathing became hard. Emergency calls started pouring in from different parts of the city. And nobody at first understood what they were looking at. Was it a leak? Some kind of accident? Industrial contamination? What Tokyo was actually facing was something far worse. A coordinated chemical attack carried out during the morning rush by members of a doomsday cult called Shinrikyo. And the question hanging over everything was simple. How did a religious movement get to this point? To understand that morning, you have to step back and look at the man at the center of it. Shinrikyo was founded by Shoko Asahara. To his followers, he was not just a teacher or spiritual guide. He presented himself as someone with extraordinary abilities and special insight. He talked about enlightenment, hidden truths, and the future of humanity. And the future he described was dark. Asahara warned of global catastrophe. He preached that civilization was heading toward collapse, that most people would die, and that only a chosen few would survive. In his version of the future, the chosen survivors were the people who followed him. That kind of message can be powerful, especially for people who are searching for certainty. Early followers were not joining a group they thought would become infamous. Many were looking for purpose, meaning, answers, or a place to belong. That is how groups like this can grow. They do not start by showing people their ugliest face. They start by offering clarity, a system, a community, a promise that the world makes sense if you listen to the right person. Then the demands get heavier. Inside Shinrikyo, members gave up more and more of themselves. Possessions were surrendered, ties to family weakened. Daily life started revolving around the organization. And as that happened, Asahara's authority grew stronger and stronger, until questioning him became harder, and disagreeing with him became dangerous. That alone would have been alarming, but Shinrikyo had something else that made it especially dangerous. It attracted highly educated followers. Scientists joined. Engineers joined. Chemists joined. This was not just a fringe spiritual group, built on belief alone. It included people with technical skill, professional training, and the ability to build sophisticated systems. That changed everything about what the group was capable of doing. At some point, Shinrikyo stopped being only a movement with extreme ideas, and started becoming an organization with the means to act on them. Behind the scenes, it began building facilities that looked less like religious centers and more like industrial laboratories. Years later, investigators would find evidence of chemical production, biological research, weapon development, and experiments. That is one of the most chilling parts of this story. The danger was growing quietly. To the outside world, may have looked strange or fringe, or simply easy to dismiss. But inside the group, something much more serious was taking shape. It was becoming organized, secretive, and technically capable. And the subway attack was not the first sign that the group had crossed into violence. Evidence later pointed to earlier incidents and experiments. Warning signs were there. The problem was that they were not fully understood until after the attack. So on that Monday morning in March 1995, the group put a plan into motion. Several operatives boarded different trains in Tokyo. They did not stand out. They were not carrying guns. They were not wearing masks. They looked like ordinary passengers, which was part of the plan. Each one carried a plastic package filled with liquid sarin, a deadly nerve agent originally developed for warfare. Sarin is colorless, hard to detect, and incredibly toxic. Once inhaled or absorbed, it attacks the nervous system. Victims can experience blurred vision, difficulty breathing, severe sweating, nausea, convulsions, and paralysis. In high enough concentrations, death can come quickly. Most people in Tokyo had probably never imagined they would come into contact with something like that on a subway train. But that is exactly what happened. The operatives had simple instructions: leave the bag, puncture it, get off the train. After that, the attack would spread on its own. And because this was happening across multiple subway lines during rush hour, confusion became one of the attackers' biggest advantages. People were getting sick in different places at nearly the same time. Victims were stepping off trains and collapsing across the city. Emergency crews were rushing towards scenes they could not yet explain. That first stretch of the crisis was defined by uncertainty. Responders knew people were in distress, but they did not know why. Was it toxic air, a malfunction, some kind of accidental release? The idea that a doomsday cult had launched a chemical weapons attack on the subway during the morning commute was so outside normal expectations that it was not the first answer anybody reached for. And in that gap between symptoms and understanding, the impact widened. What makes this attack so haunting is how ordinary it looked at the beginning. There was no explosion, no dramatic warning, no obvious sign that the city had just been hit. It began with commuters doing what they had done hundreds of times before, and with attackers who blended into the crowd. That quiet beginning made the reality even harder to process. As the scale of the emergency became clearer, authorities moved in on Shinrikyo. Raids followed, and what investigators found was shocking. They expected to find evidence connected to the attack. They did not expect the scale of what had been built. Laboratories were discovered. Chemical stockpiles were found. Equipment linked to weapon production turned up. The picture changed almost immediately. This was no longer just a story about an isolated act by a few extremists. It showed that the organization had spent years preparing for scenarios shaped by Asahara's apocalyptic worldview. In other words, the attack on the subway was not some sudden break from the group's identity. It was the result of a long internal process. Years of isolation, years of obedience, years of increasingly extreme beliefs, and years of building the tools to turn those beliefs into action. That may be the hardest thing to sit with in this case. The people responsible were not part of a foreign army. They were not an invading force. They were members of an organization operating inside Japan, made up of fellow citizens, many of them educated and technically skilled, all working under the influence of a leader who convinced them that catastrophe was coming and that extraordinary violence could be justified. The core mystery of this case is not really who did it. Investigators identified the perpetrators. Authorities uncovered the organization's facilities. Shoko Asahara and numerous followers were eventually convicted. The deeper question is how so many people were pulled into something like this at all. How did a spiritual movement become a group capable of chemical warfare? How did warning signs fail to stop it sooner? And how did intelligent, trained professionals become part of a machine that carried out mass casualty terrorism? Those questions still pull people back to this case. One answer seems clear from the path Shinrikyo followed. Absolute certainty can be dangerous. So can total loyalty to a charismatic leader. And when a group cuts itself off from outside reality while convincing its members that they alone understand what is coming, the line between belief and violence can start to disappear. By the time the outside world fully grasped what Shinrikyo had become, Tokyo had already paid the price. The attack killed and injured numerous people, sickened thousands more, and became one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in modern Japanese history. And even now, one detail still stands out above everything else. Not the laboratories, not the raids, not even the name of the cult. It is the normality of the morning it chose. A crowded city, a routine commute, people checking the time, finding their stop, getting ready for work. Then an invisible nerve agent enters the space, and an ordinary Monday turns into one of the darkest days the city had ever seen. That is why this story lingers. It is not just about a cult with apocalyptic ideas. It is about how danger can grow quietly, behind closed doors, while the rest of the world goes on assuming the day ahead will be normal. Tokyo's trains still run. The stations are still crowded. The rhythm of the city kept going. But the memory of that morning stayed behind, a reminder that some of history's worst attacks do not begin with noise. Sometimes they begin in silence, with a bag left on the floor, and a city that has no idea what is about to happen. Visit us at readtherealstory.com for more unbelievable true stories. Until next time, stay curious.